Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to thank and pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hi everyone, and welcome to On the House, the Household Management Science Insights podcast, produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element, with expert knowledge from professionals in the field. I'm your host, Gabriella Yastra, coming to you from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's get started. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. I'm here today with freelance writer Sharon Franke, who specialises in testing and writing about kitchen equipment. How are you today?
I'm great. Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you too. So we're here today to talk about which kitchen appliances we actually need and what appliances we should invest in. But before we get going, would you like to talk a bit about yourself?
Sure. So I always like to say that I was the original foodie. From the time I was born, I was always craving food experiences. I just wanted to cook as much as I could. And I went to cooking school. I did graduate from college, from university, I think you call it in Australia. And but I then went to cooking school and took professional cooking classes. And I did work for 7 years as a professional chef. But being a professional chef and a cook is a very hard job. It's a blue collar job, and I realized after a while that that's not what I wanted to do with my life, and I probably wasn't going to be a superstar as a chef. So, peeling crates of apples wasn't how I wanted to spend my days. Um, so I started looking for a job as a recipe developer, and I saw an ad in the New York Times, which is how jobs were generally found in those days, here in New York anyway. And I saw a job for a microwave recipe tester. And I just needed a job. So I went in for the interview. And in those days, it was the beginning of the celebration of the chef. So they were very impressed by the fact that I had a chef's background and wanted to hire me. And I remember my boss saying to me, I'm really impressed with your cooking skills, but I'm worried about your writing skills. And I was like totally taken aback. I felt like I was college educated. I was a good writer. It never occurred to me that that could be an issue. And I started the job. And at the beginning, I was primarily developing recipes to be used in the microwave oven, something I knew nothing about. But again, I needed a job. I said I could do it. I don't think I started the job for about a month. So I borrowed my next door neighbor's microwave. I didn't even have a microwave, and taught myself how to use it. And as part of being a microwave, the microwave department also covered other appliances. So I started to write about other appliances. And it turned out, for me, it was the luckiest thing that ever happened to me, because although I thought I would have preferred to be a recipe developer, there are lots and lots of recipe developers, but there's not that many appliance experts. And it really allowed me to develop a niche and to develop a specialty that's unique, and to develop an expertise and a reputation that I probably wouldn't have been able to get anyplace else. And actually, where I worked started as the microwave tester was at Good Housekeeping magazine, and I stayed there for 30 years. And for 30 years, worked my way up. And most of those 30 years, I was managing the testing lab for kitchen appliances at Good Housekeeping. It developed a lot of standards for testing appliances, got to know appliance manufacturers, and really dig in deep, which I found is what I like to do. And I also was good at writing. So I was able to really combine my love for food in a unique way with a talent for writing.
That's amazing. I would never have thought that that would be been a job, and that you would, I guess, start off with a background as a chef, and then, you know, it's just so different.
When you like to cook, you're interested in in kitchen equipment. And again, initially I didn't think that's what I wanted to specialize in, but it, as I said, I developed an area that was unique to me and that I love to do. And, and I feel, it's funny because I feel like I really know what works and what doesn't work. I've tested almost every knife out there, every set of cookware out there. I know the differences, and I hear what people say, and a lot of what people say is accurate, but sometimes one person will say something and it just gets passed on and everybody believes it, especially if it's in a somewhat prestigious publication here in the States. And I feel like I really know. I know what works, what doesn't work, what's good and what's bad. And sometimes it is the most expensive product, but sometimes it's not. You know, there are certain brands, they'll be best in every single category, and then a category will come along and it just can't excel in that category. But everybody just thinks, oh, that's the brand I want because that brand has the reputation. So, it's a good feeling just personally to know this. And, and it is helpful. And I also feel like I had a career where I was able to help people. I was able to help people make decisions. It's funny, I was recently at a new doctor's, and the doctor's in the examining room, and he said to me, "So, what do you do for a living?" And of course I told him, and like he stops and he says, "Oh, what do you think about the Breville toaster oven?" And from there, we got into a whole, conversation about appliances, and he was just as interested in my expertise and in how I could help his wife and his kitchen as I was, in hearing what he had to say about me. So, funny story.
Yeah. So we'll start off by getting into the rapid fire questions. So that's sort of just like a warm up where you just say the first thing that comes into your mind. What's your favorite book?
Jane Eyre. So Jane Eyre has been my favorite book since I was a young girl. It was probably, I always, even as a young child, was a prolific reader, and I always loved books about girls that were outsiders and that had to strive to overcome being different. And Jane Eyre was probably the first somewhat adult version of that genre that I read. And I go back to it all the time and I still love it. Not so much for the Gothic story, but just for the idea of this, this girl who was so hard up and had so little in life and how much she achieved.
So what's a movie or a documentary that you love?
Well, my favorite movie of all time is probably Lost in Translation. And I love the subtlety of it. I love I love the way both of them were lost, not only in Japan, but just in their own personal lives. In a way, the way these two people who were so different in age and so different in their stages of life were able to communicate with each other in such a subtle way. And I love the way it was always kept subtle. They never really did anything to embrace their love. They separated at the end. They were both mature enough to know that they really couldn't be a couple, but the subtlety of it is just has always spoken to me. I've probably seen that movie dozens of times.
Um, is there a podcast that you love at the moment?
Well, my favorite podcast right now is called Living the Dream. It's produced by La Dames d'Escoffier New York, which is an organization that I belong to. It's an organization of professional women. And again, it's a podcast that really focuses on women and their careers and how they built their careers. So I love that. And I have been featured on that podcast as well.
We'll have to check it out then. Is there an app that you like using or an
I
app
love
that you use the most?
Instagram. I look at Instagram all day long. I love Instagram. I love the pictures. I love catching up with people. I love finding people. Like a zillion other people, I became a sourdough bread baker during pandemic, and my feed now is filled with sourdough breads. And I love looking at them. I love seeing people demonstrate their techniques. And there are people I haven't seen in 10, 20, or longer years, but I love being able to see what they're up to.
Is there a course that you've completed recently?
I haven't completed a course recently. No, I haven't. I after college, as I said, I took a lot of pastry making and cooking courses, and they were invaluable to me.
And what about an event you've attended?
So just a week ago Saturday, I went to an event here in New York called Cherry Bomb, and it's I think this was the ninth happening. Um, it hadn't happened for the last 2 years because of the pandemic, and everybody was so happy to be together. But it's really an event that celebrates women in the culinary world, and it brings a lot of people together. And the thing that I particularly loved this year is that it was very inspirational. It wasn't informational. So everybody that came out was inspiring. There were people of all ages and all different careers within the food industry, but everybody had overcome some adversity. There was even one chef I think her company was called Soul and Wheels, and she's in a wheelchair. And it wasn't informational. Usually, the conference, there'll be a session on how to brand yourself or how to cook or how to write a cookbook. And there was nothing like that. And in a way, it was better because it couldn't disappoint. Because very often, when you go to something that's informational, you don't get what you're expecting to get. And you say, oh, what did they say? But everybody had a really positive message. I mean, you could just feel the energy in the room. There were 700 women at the conference and lots of networking opportunities before, in the middle, and afterward as well, with lots of yummy cocktails and snacks.
And I guess it's good after 2 years of not great times. It's good to be inspired to continue.
Yeah, absolutely. You could feel the energy bursting out of the room. The keynote speaker for the conference was Rachel Ray, and she was incredibly inspiring. She comes across as, I must say, I never sat home and watched her TV show, so I didn't know her that well from TV. But when she speaks, she comes across as such a real person, and she's so self effacing, and she's also so incredibly generous in her spirit. She's so concerned about, she really presented a model that spoke to me. She said, first you think about what you need, then you think about what your people need, the people that work for you, and then you think, about what does the general community need? What can I give back on a larger sense? And it's only after that you start to think about the gravy. How many houses do you need, or do I need a boat? And it was a beautiful message, and it really spoke to me. And I believe she said that she had given away something like $66 million over the course of her work life. So, I mean, how could you not be inspired by that? It was like the ultimate inspiring talk. And she was interviewed by a journalist here she's based in Atlanta, Georgia, but she works for the New York Times. But, she didn't have to even ask her a question. She just, once Rachel gets going, she just talks. She knows how to deliver the message.
That'd
And
be
that was the last speaker, so I think it really ended on a high with that. And of course, I think usually there's a few men in the audience. I didn't see any men this year, maybe one, and no male speakers whatsoever. And, there was one speaker who came up, and she had her baby in her arms, and her toddler in her arms, and she put the toddler down, and the toddler was eating Cheerios while she was speaking. There was another woman who was maybe 9 months pregnant. So it's such a rich feeling of it being women and of accepting women and understanding. To me, the message was women have children and they can be difficult to deal with when you work, but they don't have to be an impediment. Women can still work even though they're mothers and pregnant. So to me, that was part of the inspiration of the conference, that not saying, oh, you don't have a babysitter today, you can't come, you can't speak.
it's the whole not stopping women from being able to participate because they have children.
Exactly, exactly. So I thought it really just like it personified the message that the conference was giving, that we're women and we have children and we can still work and we can still contribute and make a difference.
Mm.
And nobody was, worried about Cheerios on the floor of the not the podium, the stage.
So we'll move on to the interview, if that's okay.
That's great.
Yeah. Um, so, uh, why do you think household management is important, just in general?
Well, I think it's as with anything, I think it's important to have order and to have discipline in your life. And I think it's important for a variety of reasons. The most important ones are probably the most obvious is that it's orderly. You know where things are. You don't buy 16 things because you don't know where the others are. You know what you have. It saves you money, it saves you time. But I think it also, even more than that, empowers you and makes you feel good about yourself, because people want to feel like they're in control of their lives. There's a lot of things that it's hard to control, but you can control your household and you can keep it orderly and you can manage it. And it gives a sense of satisfaction and a sense of pride and a sense of just feeling, in general, feeling good about yourself and that you can do it. So I think it's very important.
And what about some misconceptions? Yeah.
Well, people think it's just too hard and they think it's hard to do and they don't want to put in the time and energy to do it. It's time consuming. That you see so many articles about how to manage your home, and sometimes I think, really, do people still need information about it? But clearly they do, because it continues to be an issue. But I'm a person who believes everything should have a place, and I like to organize everything according to what it is. So I tend to like a somewhat messy aesthetic. I don't like things that are totally clean and barren. But so I'll have a lot of canisters with tools in my kitchen, but all of the wooden spoons are in one, all of the whisks are in another, and the one for the with the wooden spoons is always in one place, and the one for the whisks is always in the other place. So when I need a whisk, I know where it is. When I need a measuring spoon, I know they're in the measuring spoon case. I mean, I guess like almost everyone, I do have one junk drawer where there's a lot of stuff that somehow didn't fit someplace else, but I rarely need to go to that. For the most part, when I walk into my kitchen to start either working or testing an appliance or cooking or whatever I'm doing, I know where things are and I make sure they go back in that place.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than getting halfway through making a cake and you can't find the right spatula.
Yeah, so I mean, I know where everything is, and it may be part of a sense of getting older, but I feel like the older I get, the more organized I become, so that I lay out even more things. And in French cooking, there's a term called mise en place, which basically means getting all of your ingredients in order before you start cooking, so that you're not scurrying around looking for things. But I kind of apply the same principle more and more to my tools. So I'll make sure, that I have the tools out. I make rice a lot, and I know that I like to use a certain fork to fluff the rice and a certain spoon to serve the rice. And when after I put the rice on to cook, I put out the spoon and fork so that when the rice is ready, finished cooking, I'm ready. And I'm not scrounging around. And if for some reason the spoon and fork I like aren't clean, I can wash it ahead of time. I'm not washing it, at the same time that I'm trying to put dinner on the table.
And I guess that means that food goes on the table faster, so it's not cooling down.
Food goes on the table faster. Yeah, it goes out when it's hot or when it's properly cooked. And there's no scrounging around, there's no panicking at the end. So, I do, as I said, I find I get more and more organized as time goes on. But I think a certain degree of organization is important.
Um, so you said that you're quite minimalist with your kitchen appliances. Um,
Yeah, so in spite of the fact that I test kitchen equipment for a living, and I've tested, I mean, I recently finished a test of spiralizers, I've tested mandolins, I've tested just, I mean, you name it, and I've tested it. But in my own kitchen, I tend to be a minimalist. So I, for example, I like to make coffee, a pour over coffee. What's now very trendy is a pour over coffee. I've made coffee like that my entire life. People come into my kitchen and it just stunned that I don't have an electric coffee maker. Um, I do have a toaster oven, which I use a lot. And, if we could talk about it a little later on, but I think a toaster of some sort is probably something everybody else needs. But those are the only two appliances that I have out and ready to go at all times. I do have hand and stand mixers that I wouldn't want to live without when I bake. And I think anyone who bakes needs them. But rice is a good example. I must say, we don't eat huge quantities of rice, and at this point in time, we're only two people in the house, so I don't use a rice cooker. Feel like it's very easy to make rice in a pot. I've been making it my whole life in a pot. It's like learn how to use it. You don't need a rice cooker. Um, it's I kind of hate to say it because I don't like to shoot what I do in the foot, but people love slow cookers, and I've tested slow cookers over and over again. But recently I was testing them, and I thought I could have made this in a skillet in 20 minutes. It didn't have to cook for 4.5 hours in a slow cooker. It's like I don't really get it. Um, but, I can segue into that now. I'm kind of thinking about the list of questions in my head. But what I say to people is the first thing you really need to do when you're buying appliances is think about how you cook and what you actually need, and not think, oh, if I have a better tool, I'll be a better cook. And I was thinking about this yesterday. Another one of my favorite movies is an old movie by Albert Brooks called Modern Love. I don't know if you've seen it. He breaks up with his girlfriend. He's he breaks up with her, and then he's sorry he broke up with her, so he decides he's going to reinvent himself. He's going to get himself in shape, and he goes to the sporting goods store. This is going to run. He's going to be a runner. He goes to the sporting goods store and he buys, a whole expensive outfit, from a headband to something to carry money in while he runs, to expensive running shoes. He gets out onto the track and he starts to run, and he runs right to the nearest telephone booth and calls up his girlfriend. And that's it. That's the end of the running shoes. And, you know, that's what I think. People say, I'm going to buy an instant pot and then I'll make chicken soup for dinner every day. Or, I'm going to buy a slow cooker and then I can make, beef stew all the time. But people have to be really, I think, realistic about whether they want to cook those things. What you need to put time into preparing food, even if you could cook it in a slow cooker or an instant pot. Are you willing to do that? And as I said before, I started baking sourdough bread during the pandemic, and I bake bread I'd say once a week now, and I still just put the bread in a tea cloth, a bowl lined with a tea cloth. It's only about 2 weeks ago that I said to myself, maybe I'll buy a bread basket for my bread. Like, now I know I really like to bake bread. I can spend the $20 on the bread basket, but you can say I'm going to bake sourdough bread and just order, 50 things, and then, after 2 weeks you decide this isn't for me. It's too much work. So people have to sit down and think realistically about what they actually need. Um, and not buy expensive appliances that they're never going to open or that are going to be in the tag sale after one use. And, probably the best example of that type of appliance is the juicer. So that's another good example. People think, I'm going to get healthy, I'm going to make juice, I'm going to juice. And they buy this expensive, complicated appliance that only does one thing, that all it does is juice, and it requires a huge amounts of fruits and vegetables that are expensive. And a lot of the fruits and vegetables are going into the garbage because it's pulp. And, after a short time, that thing isn't being used anymore. So, people, before somebody buys a juicer, I think they should decide they really want to drink juice every single day and they're not satisfied with the juice that they can buy.
Is there a way that you can, I don't know, I guess borrow equipment to try it out? Would you recommend doing that?
Well, I don't know of an organized way that you could do that, but you certainly, like I said, when I started my career, I borrowed a microwave from my next door neighbor. Um, certainly somebody could borrow equipment from a friend and see how much they liked using it. If they had, a friend or a relative that was willing to lend them something, I think it would be smart because especially if it's something they're not sure of. If you know that you're a baker and you like to bake, I would say go ahead and spring for a stand mixer or a hand mixer. That's something of a no-brainer. Again, I think most people drink coffee. They need some kind of method for making coffee, whether it's a pour over filter or a coffee maker. And most people like toasted bread, so they need some kind of toaster. But beyond that, it's hard for me to think about something that everybody needs. I mean, blenders, are really indispensable if you drink a lot of smoothies or if you make a lot of soups. Um, and, you really do need them if that's what you do. But again, you know, owning the appliances isn't going to make you a cook. So if you're making soup, and you've made soup a lot and you've tried to strain it and you're like sick of putting it through a food mill or you think it's not smooth enough from a food processor, let's say, yeah, go ahead and get a blender. It'll make your life a lot easier. But it's not going to turn you into a cook by owning the blender. It's kind of the same thing as this guy buying all this running equipment. Owning the running equipment isn't going to make him a runner. He would have been better off running in his tennis shoes for a month and saying, "Gee, I really love running, but I could use a better pair of shoes," rather than starting out by spending. When you see the movie now, I think it was maybe $100 for all the equipment. Probably the shoes themselves would be $200 now, but so it's not going to turn you into a cook. It's not going to make you healthier. So there, well, appliances are tools that are supposed to make your life easier, but they're not going to change your habits for you. So you're better off changing your habits first and then buying the tools to support your habits or your practices rather than starting with the equipment. But I it's hard to tell people that.
Yes. So
Thinking about your own closet and what's
I
sitting
am thinking, well, so I was thinking about mine, and actually, I we got quite a small kitchen, and we've already got quite a few appliances, and I think that we use most of the appliances actually. So during the pandemic, my partner wanted to buy a coffee machine, and I was really against it because we had had a coffee machine and it had broken down, and he never washed the coffee machine. We used it a couple times, and then it just sat on the counter, and I hated it. And so when he suggested getting a replacement coffee machine, I was like, no, you won't use it. You'll never use it. It'll just take up space. I'll have to clean it. Um, and you know what? After a couple months, he was like, no, I really want one. I'm just going to buy one. So he bought one and he uses it every single day and he makes me a coffee every single day. So, yeah, I think because it was something that he had thought about for more than, for more than 2 minutes, I think it ended up being a good purchase.
Well, and I mean, let's face it, for most of us drink coffee. So, and it was hard to go out and buy coffee during the pandemic.
Mm.
So it totally makes
I
sense.
I drink instant coffee, so the coffee machine wasn't necessarily for me. But yeah, he's more picky about what he drinks.
But
Um,
but I have to say, over and over again, I've brought espresso machines into the house. Maybe they've been gifted to me, or I've tested them and haven't had to give them back. And I'll get really excited how I'm going to have an espresso machine. I'm going to make cappuccino, and it'll sit in the kitchen for, a week, a month, and then after a while, it's like, this is just too much trouble. I have to clean this thing all the time. It's a whole process. I'm used to making coffee. I only get this little cup. I like my big mug, and the thing eventually disappears from the kitchen. And I also have a small kitchen, so I'm, you know, think about a lot about what I want to dedicate space to. And I certainly know in the UK that they depend very heavily on electric kettles. I don't know if that's the case in Australia as well.
I would say so.
Yeah,
I've always had an electric kettle.
they're not
Sorry.
used that much here in the States for whatever reason. Here in the States, they're viewed of as a tool for elderly people who might leave the flame on or the burner on. So people buy it for their elderly parents so that they don't have to worry about them burning the house down. But it's not used as much by the general public.
That's so funny. It's been in like every single house that I've lived in. I find it so useful. And there was only one place I lived in that didn't have a kettle, and I constantly left the kettle on the stove, and it would boil dry because I'm so used to it.
Yeah, I mean, we do use a kettle every day because we make pour over coffee, but I'm very aware that that's a very basic piece of equipment for probably everyone in the UK for sure.
So, what are some other kitchen equipment that you would recommend, or that you think every household should have, like knives, chopping boards?
Yeah, so I think every kitchen needs a good set of pots. And again, they don't necessarily need a huge array, but they need a few skillets in a few different sizes. Um,
What is a skillet?
So a skillet is like a fry pan. So it's a
Okay.
shallow pot with shallow sides. And the word fry pan, saute pan, and skillet are used somewhat interchangeably. Technically, a saute pan has very straight sides, and they might be a little bit higher, whereas a skillet will have a sloped edge. So with a skillet, you'd turn out an omelet, let's say, whereas in a straight-sided saute pan, you might make something like coq au vin, where you're browning the chicken and then cooking it in a sauce. But all three can be used interchangeably, and I think people should have an 8-inch size for making an omelet or just making scrambled eggs for yourself for dinner. A 10-inch size is a good size for maybe making chops or hamburgers. And then I think everybody needs a 12-inch size. Well, anyone who cooks at all, because in a 12-inch size, you could make chili, you could make stew, you could make, unless you have really a lot of sauce, you could make just about anything. And then people need a Dutch oven. People who cook need a Dutch oven, and that would be for a larger roast or bigger quantity of soup, and that could even double as a pot for boiling water for pasta. I mean, technically, people who are serious about pasta or about cooking will always say you need an 8-quart pasta pot to boil water. You need a lot of water. And that's true, but you could get away with a 6-quart Dutch oven if you really wanted to be minimalist about things. And then when it comes to saucepans, again, I used to use a lot of saucepans until the microwave came into my life, but now I think the only thing I really use a saucepan for is rice because if I'm warming up soup, or warming up vegetables, I do it in the microwave. So I don't use that many saucepans, but yet saucepans come in every set. So when you buy a whole set, you could be getting a lot of pieces that you're never going to use. So sets are a great buy from a, money-wise, they're a great buy if you need all the pieces in the set. If you don't need all the pieces, you just wind up with a lot of stuff you don't need. So people should, in addition to looking at the brand and the materials, they should look at the pieces in the set and see if the pieces meet their needs. Because sometimes it could say a 10-piece set, but if a lot of the pieces are small and you have a large family, you're not going to have what you need. So generally, I like sets that include larger pieces because they give you more capabilities to cook more food. Um, but I think everyone does need a good set of cookware, and everybody needs not sharp knives is the trickiest thing to talk about, to be honest, because in order to really be effective and to cut well, a knife needs to be sharp. But it's not easy to keep knives sharp. People buy a set of knives and bring them home and immediately say they weren't sharp. And you have to be willing to put some work into sharpening them. And, serrated knives or so-called never needs sharpening knives are much maligned. People, everybody turns their noses up at them. They would never be recommended by any magazine. But I always say you're better off with a knife like that than a $300 knife that's dull because
Mhm.
they're not usable. So I mean, it's a hard thing to talk about because the right answer or what I believe is that everybody needs three knives: a chef's knife, a paring knife, and a serrated bread knife. But those knives need to be sharp, and if they're not sharp, it's just useless. You could just use one serrated knife. It's a really hard message to get across. And I do encourage people to buy. There's so many sharpeners on the market now that are easy to use. They hold the knife in the right place, so there's no skill involved, but they still take some time, and there is a big difference in the quality of the edge. But when you talk about a knife's edge and about sharpening a knife, a lot of what you're talking about is microscopic. You can't really see it. So you could talk and talk about it, but it's almost meaningless to people because they don't see it. But an expensive electric knife sharpener will put a real edge on a knife, and gadgets generally won't, but they will make them cut better. So, anything that's sharp is better than anything that's dull.
So, would you recommend just buying any of the knife sharpeners, or would you recommend getting a professional sharpening service?
I think
Um,
professional services are great. The problem with professional services is that chances are people are only going to use them once a year, maybe before the holidays. And if you only do have three knives, chances are your knives are going to need to be sharpened more than once a year. And if you have a tool in the house, you can do it more often. And, it really doesn't take that long. So you can do it, in a few minutes and you're ready. Whereas if you take them to a service, sometimes you have to mail them in or you have to leave them in the store and pick them up in a week, plus the expense you're going to pay for the sharpening. But really, the very best sharpeners are the electrically operated. I hate to tell people to do this, but when you run your finger along the edge of a knife that's been sharpened on an electric sharpener, you can feel that it's been ground to a smooth, fine edge. And when you use the little tools, even from a good manufacturer, when you run your finger across, it's almost like it's turned it into a micro serrated knife. You can feel it'll be very sharp, but it definitely has little teeth around the edge, but on a microscopic level. But still, even those little gadgets, there were good ones for as little as $5, $10. It's still better than using a dull knife. And those steels that butchers use are basically useless. So I don't encourage people to buy them or even to use them.
that's what I've got at home.
Yeah, I have a lot of them at home too, but I don't use them at all anymore. In a very technical way, they can straighten out the edge, but you need to be able to hold the knife at a very consistent angle as you run it across this the tool. And if you can't maintain that, you're not really helping the knife. So it as I said, it's hard to talk to consumers about because consumers barely understand what you're talking about. Um, but so many people have big collections of expensive knives, but they complain to me all the time. I bought the wood stuff. It's dull. It doesn't work. Well, you have to sharpen it. Even the best knife isn't going to be effective. And with
How
yeah, I'm sorry. And one more thing I would say about knives is that knives are very personal, so people really need to you can buy them online, but it's a good thing to try out in the store and see how it feels in your hands and whether it's comfortable for you. And the same with cookware. In general, heavier cookware performs better than lighter cookware, but a lot of it is, how much you like to how something feels to you and how much weight you like to have. So it's hard to, make a blanket statement.
how often would you recommend to sharpen your knives?
So a sharp knife should be able to, when you take a piece of paper and you go like this, it should cut immediately. It should make a slash right down. If you take your knife and you run it on a paper and it doesn't cut, it's not sharp if the paper just kind of bends. It also, when you rest it on top of a tomato, it should make a little slice in the tomato just from resting on it. So it's really not a matter of time, it's a matter of when is it dull, when is it not cutting. If you're starting to cut an onion and it's starting to slide on the onion instead of go down, it's no longer sharp. So how often you have to do it depends a lot on how often you use your knife and how much you use it. But if a knife is well sharpened, I would venture to say people could go 3 months without sharpening it. And most of these knife sharpeners have different degrees of sharpening, so you might not have to do it on the finest one. You might be able to do it on the middle one if you know if you do it often. But if it starts to get really dull, you really have to start. And and I'll say another thing. You do every time you sharpen it, you do remove a little bit of the edge, and that's why very often in a butcher shop you'll see very thin knives, long thin knives, and sometimes it's because so much they sharpen them so often that so much of the knife has been worn away. And very often people will say to me, I don't want to sharpen my knife because I'm taking away the edge. And yes, you are, but so what? It's like you could have a beautiful knife that has its whole edge, but you can't cut an onion with it. And you're not buying the knife for it to look good in your kitchen or to pass it on to your children. You're buying it to cut a tomato. And, if you're going to have that kind of feeling about it, that you're using up the knife, then don't buy a $300 knife or even $100 knife. You could get a good knife for a lot less and not worry as much about it.
I also imagine it would just take a long time to actually wear away a knife to nothing.
Well, yeah, I mean, I have in the past when I worked in restaurants, I had knives that where the shape was changed, but they were sharpened every week. So it would take nobody's going to sharpen their knives every week. So I just don't think it's something people have to worry about.
So, what other kitchen equipment would you recommend,
So
or should
again,
everyone have?
so again, Um, a food processor is very handy. If you don't, I personally really like using a knife, so I tend to cut with a knife. But they can do a good job of things like chopping onions if it's something you're not really that comfortable doing. They're great for things like grating Parmesan cheese, making breadcrumbs, grating parsley. Again, if you don't really like knife skills, a food processor is a great tool. They work really well, and occasionally I don't use mine that often, but if I'm making in the summer, I'll pull it out a lot to make pesto. I confess I don't use a mortar and a pestle. I find it just difficult to do, and I am fine with doing it in the food processor. So I tend to pull it out a lot in the summer because I feel like that's something you really need to do in a food processor, because with a food processor, you'll still get some texture, whereas in the blender, it's very easy to destroy the texture of the nuts and the basil. As I said, a blender, I think it has a lot of applications, and a lot of people will need a blender, and I think people should just think carefully about whether they need it. Um, again, um, uh, an instant pot or even a stovetop pressure cooker is a great tool. They perform really well. They do a fantastic. I prefer an instant pot or a pressure cooker to a slow cooker. I think they do a better job of actually cooking, and they cook more quickly. And I think for somebody who's willing to put in some time and effort into food preparation, into cutting things up and seasoning things carefully, but maybe doesn't want something simmering for 3 hours, I think something that could do it in 45 minutes is a great tool. But again, certainly the instant pot has been a runaway success in the last 10 to 15 years, but and I do think they get used by some people, but I think there's a lot of them that have been bought on impulse because there's been such a craze for them. And I do, instead of a toaster, I use a toaster oven, and I find that I will do, I'll roast vegetables. I don't bake in it at all, and I don't cook much meat in it, but I'll do a lot of roasting of vegetables in it or warming up of pizza. So for me, it's really indispensable. It's something I wouldn't want to live without. So I think having a toaster oven gives you a lot more, just it can do more than just toast, and it could also toast. And I think, again, people have to think about what they actually cook, what kind of foods. If people put and again, I have a microwave, and there's some backlash against the microwave, especially here in New York City. But statistics tell us that probably 90% of all homes have a microwave oven if for nothing else, for reheating. And that's something I wouldn't want to live without. And if people are happy with the way food comes out reheated in the microwave oven and don't miss the crisping that you get for it, then maybe they don't need a toaster oven. And we really should talk about the air fryer, because the air fryer has been, the biggest sensation, I would say, of the last 5 years. Um, I've tested many of them, and I don't have one in my own kitchen. I'm not a huge fan of them. Um, first of all, they're not really frying. So what they're doing, it's kind of like oven frying or crisping, may be better than an oven, maybe with more air movement and more heat than in an oven. But if you see food and eat food side by side that's been cooked in oil and that food's been in an air fryer, it's not the same thing. And when you drop food into oil, the food cooks to an internal doneness at the same time that it's crisping. So you get a food that's not only crispy outside, but it's perfectly cooked inside. But when you cook meat in an air fryer, inevitably it's going to be cooked to a higher temperature than it needs to be in order to be crisp. So I but I know that people love them, and people do use them all the time, people who have them. Um, so I don't really know how to explain it. I was also been really surprised when I test them that they can do a nice job of cooking hamburgers and or even steaks, and they don't make as much of a mess. So the grease, because it's an enclosed appliance, it keeps the grease inside, whereas when you cook hamburgers in a pan, you're going to get splatters, or even in the oven. And they actually also even do a credible job of roasting a chicken without spattering. But I think most people are buying them for food that's supposedly fried, but I personally don't see a big difference between chicken nuggets that are cooked in the regular toaster oven and cooked in the air fryer. But
Yeah, yeah, sorry.
no, but the public proves me wrong because I know that people not only buy them, but they love them.
So I actually borrowed one because I was thinking about, do I want one? There seems to be this huge craze for them. So I borrowed one. Um, and I mean, I don't eat that much fried food at home because I'd rather go out and have fried food. It's very much of a hassle. So I was using it mostly for like roasting.
Uh-huh.
And I just found it sort of did the same job as the oven, but I had to like look after it more and I could only do one thing at a time.
Well, that's true. You can
Um,
only do one
yeah,
thing at a time. Look, I say that about all these countertop ovens. There's very few homes that don't have an oven, and it's just not that hard to use an oven. So I don't understand why people need another oven like a lot of these big countertop ovens do a very good job, but like why do you need it? Why can't you put it in your oven? And ovens themselves are so sophisticated these days that but having said that, when I roasted a chicken in the thing I liked about the air fryer for roasting the chicken, surprisingly, was it didn't splatter. So, there's nothing to my mind, nothing. One of the first things I ever learned to make was a roast chicken in the oven, and there's nothing as delicious as an oven roasted chicken, but it does make for a messy oven. And there's no splattering in the air fryer. You take it out and you put the dish. Usually, you can go right in the dishwasher, and that's it. So I was surprised. I was surprised myself that I saw a benefit to it, and it doesn't really crisp on the bottom, but it's hard to get it crisp on the bottom even in the regular oven unless you turn it. So I was surprised at how well it did on that, but I don't think that's what most people are buying it for. I think they're doing things like chicken cutlets and Brussels sprouts is another thing people seem to like to make. And
I tried that.
yeah,
It
that's like,
was as good as I could do it in the oven.
yeah, that's what I don't really get it. But, and people will make chicken cutlets and they're crispy, but they take like oven baked chicken cutlets. They don't take like chicken cutlets that were made in oil. They're just not the same. But it's been that category has been a phenomenon, and I've probably in the last 5 years tested it more than any other category because there's so much interest in it. But yeah, I would say that's probably one of the hottest things right now.
So we've talked about what kitchen appliances we should have. But once you've, decided I need these types of kitchen appliances, how do you decide which ones to purchase and which ones to invest your money in?
Well, I would encourage people to go to review sites and see what they recommend. And I would strongly encourage them to go to sites where they're actually tested by the organization. So, Good Housekeeping in the United States, and I believe in the UK also actually tests appliances. Review.com here in the States tests appliances. Consumer Reports, obviously. I don't know how popular it is in Australia, but they test things. So Wirecutter here in the United States, which is owned by the New York Times, tests products. So when things are actually tested, you're going to get better reviews. And, you can also cross reference. So, very often, this same sites will recommend the same appliances, and you know that they're probably good because more than one tester is recommending them. Cooks Illustrated or America's Test Kitchen, which is the same company, is another very reputable company here in the States. But I would encourage people to find out in Australia, whatever's available to them, who is actually doing the testing. And I will say, that for the most part, I'm sorry to have to say that, but for the most part, the more expensive appliances do perform better. Um, you don't necessarily have to buy the most expensive ones, So, for example, I just tested slow cookers, and without a doubt, any that were $100 and up did better than the ones that were $30. But one for $150 did just as well as one that was $300. So it wasn't necessarily, necessary to spend the ultimate amount of money unless, sometimes what you're getting for the extra money is a better looking appliance. And it might be more durable in that it's made of sturdier materials, but it still might not, people have $30 slow cookers for 30 years. So it's not necessarily that the one that costs $300 is going to, be with you for 30 years and the $150 one is going to die. But more but sometimes there are sleepers or there are very good ones for less. And that's why I think if you don't have extra money to spend and it's not critical to you what the appliance looks like, it's a good idea to go to these review sites because very often their best buy or their value is indeed a very good value or a best buy because it'll do a good job without putting you up over that $100 limit. And most of the best ones do tend to cost over $100, but I'm very well aware that over $100 is a lot of money for most people to spend on a small appliance. They do then tend to be more stainless steel and to be better looking. And, again, that's a judgment people have to make for themselves. How important is the way it looks to you? And are you willing to spend the extra? And then, of course, features are a funny thing because features add to the price. But sometimes I think retailers like to carry products with more features. So it's sometimes hard, like with a coffee maker, you might not want a programmable one. A lot of people don't. Oops, sorry, my computer's doing something weird. A lot of times, um, the retailers, well, I was saying about the programmable ones. A lot of people don't bother to actually program their coffee makers, but almost everybody's coffee maker can be programmed to start in the morning. And you'll pay extra for that feature, but sometimes it's hard to find one that isn't programmable in the stores because I think the manufacturers like to carry the ones with extra features because they can get you to spend more money on an appliance, especially if you're buying it in a better retailer. But if you truly don't need a programmable coffee maker, it's worth and money really is of the essence to you. It's worth, looking around trying to find the one that doesn't have that feature. And you'll also get a cleaner interface and you'll get something that's easier to use. I just tested a slow cooker that really it was, I think it was a $300 slow cooker, and it did a beautiful job of cooking, but it had so many programs, and I myself can't even explain to you what was the difference between all of them or why you needed them, and it made it hard to program the thing because you had to scroll through so many options, and it was so easy to make a mistake. So, more isn't necessary. More is only better if you're going to use everything that it has to offer. But, most people are probably only going to use low and high on a slow cooker. And I think this one, it had so many options, it was hard to differentiate between them. Like, why do you need that much? And it probably you're getting to some extent your money's worth. It's what's making it cost more, but you don't need that. It's overkill for you. But I do find that there are different types of shoppers. I know my friends and relatives, the people that come to me for advice, and there are some people that they just want that premium product. They want the product. Do you have Williams Sonoma in Australia? Is that familiar to you?
No,
So
that's
Williams Sonoma
not.
is probably the premium retailer of kitchen equipment here in the United States, and it's an interesting store in that I say they do a lot of curating. So whatever they have is beautiful and expensive, and they do some testing, so it's probably pretty good. It's not for the person. So a lot of brides go there who high brides who are looking for a high-end kitchen because they'll have everything and you don't have to make that many decisions. You don't have to think about what to buy. And there are certain people they're the Williams Sonoma customer. They want that thing that looks stainless steel and looks expensive and looks shiny, and they want it almost to have the stamp of approval from Williams Sonoma. They don't want the thrill of maybe finding it at Target or Walmart or at a low end retailer. They want it to come from Williams Sonoma. So, sometimes it's hard to talk people out of what they want.
So um, what's your favorite kitchen equipment or appliance? Like, what do you use the most at home?
Okay, so I love my Breville toaster oven. I I use it almost every day. That's why I laughed when the doctor asked me about it because it is, one thing I use a lot. Um, I have a Melita plastic pour over filter that gets used in my house twice a day. I love my KitchenAid mixer. I think the KitchenAid mixer is the most one of my favorite kitchen appliances, at least in theory, and I do pull it out when I bake, but I don't use it to make sourdough bread. I do that totally by hand. So, and I don't bake every day anymore. I don't have young children at home. So, I think when I was younger and I had, you know, my daughter was younger and I entertained more, I probably would have used it every day. And it was the first piece of kitchen equipment that I bought for myself once I had my own kitchen. It was something my mother didn't have and that I knew I wanted. So, to me, it's a KitchenAid stand mixer is irreplaceable for anyone who bakes. So, I would say by far those are, my two favorite pieces of equipment. And, I couldn't even tell you how many knives I have. I have every brand. I'm a big fan of Wusthof knives, and it's partly I just like the way they feel in my hand, something about the weight of the knife. It's not even just the handle, but I like that. I have a knife that's made by a knife maker called Bob Kramer. I really like his knife too. I find it stays sharp really a long time. And I use an Edgecraft, a Chef's Choice Edgecraft knife sharpener, which I don't know if they're available in Australia, but I think there's no contest. I think there are other stand mixers. I think there are other toaster ovens. There's no other knife sharpener that I would use in my own kitchen. Um, and I have an assortment of pots and pans. I rely a lot on a cast iron skillet for cooking steaks, for cooking fish, things that I want to have a nice crust. But I like nonstick cookware a lot, so I'm not phobic about nonstick cookware, and I don't think you can beat the ease of use of cleaning them. So but again, I know a lot of people have fears about nonstick, and I say if that's your thing and you're worried about it, don't use it. Everybody has to feel comfortable with the decisions they make as to what they use in their own home. And
So, do you have any? Sorry,
yeah, no, go on.
no. Say what you wanted to say.
Well, you had asked before about cutting boards, and
Hmm.
um, I like the way a wood cutting board feels under the knife. I think plastic cutting boards that are made out of polypropylene also do a very good job. I just wood is a little softer, so I like the feel of it. And I actually have a very large butcher block in table in my kitchen that I cut on, so I don't use cutting boards most of the time in my own kitchen. I think bamboo cutting boards, which are very much in vogue, are hard on a knife. And so I don't encourage people to use them other than for decorative reasons. And when I say hard on a knife, because they're hard, they will dull the knife more quickly because the knife is coming in contact with a harder surface. And I also think, it's not as clear as it seems that bamboo is sustainable because a lot depends on how the bamboo is processed and how the bamboo is shipped, not just on the fact that bamboo replenishes itself. So our bamboo cutting boards are attractive, and I think if people like them and they want to use them as cheese boards, be my guest. But I would say for cutting fruits and vegetables, buy a nice wood cutting board or even a nice poly polypropylene is the most common plastic that's used for cutting, and it's fine. The plastic is not significantly harder on your knife than the wood, and it's you can just throw the whole thing in the dishwasher. So I think that's a very good choice. Wood obviously is aesthetically pleasing, so a lot of people like it for that reason.
So, um, what about like cleaning your wooden chopping board? Is it going to be as hygienic as a plastic one?
Probably not. So as I said, I have a very long wooden butcher block that I've used for more years than I want to tell you. And I wipe it down with hot water, and I will spray bleach on it occasionally. But if I'm cutting meat or fish, I will, especially if I'm cutting up raw fish, I have a plastic cutting board, and I'll cut on that or even raw meat, so that I can then throw it into the dishwasher, or just, really wash it really well in the sink. Um, but I do think, on wood, you need to be careful. You probably need to cover it with bleach at least occasionally, and certainly after you've cut something, raw meat or poultry of some kind. And I'm very careful also to wash any fruits and vegetables before I cut them. So if there's any dirt on the outside, it's not going onto the cutting board and then being, you know, transported. If I have to cut a melon in half, I'll cut the melon in half, and then I'll usually wash the melon, but even after I've washed the melon, I'll wash the knife again in the cutting surface to try to keep it as clean as possible.
Because at my when I was growing up, we had mixture of wooden and plastic. But I found that we'd put the wooden one in the sink to wash, and after a while, it would start to get warped.
They do
Um,
tend to get warped. That is a problem. And
mm.
they do tell you to like weigh them down, wet them and weigh them down to unwarp them. But definitely that's an advantage of plastic ones is that they won't warp. But I have a wooden carving board that I use separately from my general cutting surface. And like as I said, I have a plastic board that I use. I don't have to worry about the warpage because my table's so big and it's not going to warp, but I have seen the boards warp. But there's something very aesthetically pleasing about wood, and it also it feels nice under the knife. I find that it feels nice.
Do you have any other tips for maintaining your kitchen equipment?
Well, so I can't say it enough. Keep everything clean, um, but keep it clean not only for food safety, but to prevent fire. If you leave crumbs in your toaster oven or in the bottom of your toaster, they can start a fire. Um, I just encourage people to clean everything after every use as thoroughly as possible. If things go in the dishwasher, go ahead and, I think people have to read the manuals carefully and find out whether or not things can go in the dishwasher. If they can, go ahead and put them in the dishwasher where they'll get a really good cleaning. I think you know, one of my pet peeves really is stainless steel cookware. People love stainless steel cookware because it looks so good and there's no nonstick surface to worry about. But stainless steel can get badly stained. It's not so much that the metal itself stains, but if you cook over high heat, you get splatters, they burn on. When I was little, I think my mother actually cooked in aluminum, but the outside of all her pans were like black and speckled. And I just thought that's what pots and pans looked like. And I don't think it was until I was an adult that I realized it was just fat that splattered on the edge that she just, I don't want to say didn't bother to clean off, but if you don't clean it off carefully, it starts to build up. So, it's worth spending the time to clean things, spend an extra 10 minutes one time and get rid of it rather than have it build up. And, Barkeeper's Friend, I don't know if it's I don't know if it's available is, do you know what it is?
I'm not I've heard of it on the internet, but
Yeah.
I don't know if you can get it in Australia.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly could get it from Amazon, but I don't know if they send it to Australia. But it does work wonders on cookware of all types and helps you to maintain it. So I do use it quite a bit. If it's important to you, and again, it's important to you if you don't mind having those splatters baked on. It's like, I'm not judging people. It's just if that's not what you like, you really need to keep ahead of it. But just keeping anything clean is going to keep it in better working order. So I encourage people to keep things clean.
And what about like tips for storage? Because if you've got a lot of kitchen equipment, it can be hard to make any bench space.
Well, it's hard to store, and it's something, when I write about appliances, I always point out how much space they take out, and I always, give high points to products that can be stored easily, where they either collapse or they parts store within themselves, or, for small things where they could actually go into a drawer. But obviously, slow cookers are a good example. They're large, they don't collapse. You just have to have room for it. And it's another reason why you should really think hard about whether or not you're actually going to use it, because it's going to take up a lot of space, whether you leave it out on your counter or you put it in a cabinet. And, do you have a space in a closet or a cabinet that's near the kitchen to keep that? Or is it going to have to go down in the basement? If it has to go in the basement or an attic or a closet, in another part of the house, you're that much less likely to use it because just pulling it out is going to be a chore. So it's definitely something to think about before you buy something. And I always tell people to measure the space, especially for something like a coffee maker or a toaster oven that you're going to use all the time, probably every day, and not put away. Make sure that you have enough space for it to fit in your kitchen. See how much room it's going to occupy. And for a coffee maker where you have to fill it, how much, once you open the top, how high is that? Are you going to have to pull it out from the back every time you have to put the water in? Or does it, the ones that swing from the side are easier to fill. So things like that are important for people to think about because they're going to be using this thing every day. And it's easy to get, again, it's easy to get seduced by things. Some of them are quite beautiful, but, how much room are you willing to give up in your kitchen? And the more room you give up to your coffee maker and your toaster, the less room you have for your chopping board and for cutting and chopping and actually creating food. So important to think about.
Um, was there anything that we haven't touched on that you wanted to talk about?
Well, we talked about this a little before, so just, straying away from appliances a little bit, I'll go back to talking about my career. Um, I talk to young people quite a bit about their careers. I mentor people quite a bit. And I always encourage people to be open to opportunities and to not be set in terms of what they want to do, and to take risks. And also, you know, looking at my own career, I didn't know anything about microwave cooking. I knew how to cook, and I love food, and I knew myself that I knew how to write, but I didn't let on that I didn't know about microwave cooking. She also said, "Do you know how to develop recipes?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I develop them for the restaurant all the time," which really wasn't true. I didn't have a clue now that I think back on it, but I just said yes because I wanted the opportunity, and I learned on the job. And in fact, I not that long ago heard a woman by the name of Sarah Moulton speak. Sarah Moulton, um, she's pretty well known here in the States. She has a TV show, but she got her start working for Julia Child. So she was a food stylist for Julia Child. And when she told her story, it was very similar. She said, Julia said to her, "Do you know how to style food?" And she said she didn't have a clue. She was pretty much almost a child at the point. Yeah, a true. Sarah was practically a child. She just said to Julia, "Oh yeah, I know how to style food," because she wanted the opportunity, and the rest was history. She went on to work for Julia. Julia loved and mentored her, and Sarah's quite a TV personality in her own right here. So I tell people to take chances. Don't say no. I also say don't say no to any opportunities that fall your way. Sometimes it's uncomfortable. I mean, I hate to say it, but even tonight's, a good example. It's like my career is pretty well established. So here in New York, it's 8 o'clock. It's now almost 10 o'clock at night. I don't need to be speaking to advance my career, but I like to take advantage of every opportunity that comes my way and not to say no. And that's what I encourage people to do. Don't look narrow, look big, and don't say no, and don't say, "Oh, that's not the job for me," because, things can open up in unexpected ways. And if it doesn't work out and it's not right, well, then you just turn around and say, "Well, that wasn't the right job for me, but I gave it a try." But I think, there can be such wonderful opportunities that come your way if you just take some risks. And one of really the great pleasures of my career have been all of the people that I've met along the way. And so many people have, that I feel are truly friends of mine, people who work at cookware manufacturers and appliance manufacturers that I worked with over the years and that I feel are friends. And, the other thing is they become friends and they also become resources for you. So, for example, if I have a question about cookware or I have a question about how a range operates, I know exactly who to call and I'll get answers from people who might not even answer a cold email or might not even be the person that the press contact would put me in touch with, but I don't have to write to the press contact. I know the home economist at the companies, and you that's how you build a network. But it becomes rewarding. You get a sense of reward out of it, and a sense of friendship, and a sense of being part of a community. And in the end, I think you have a richer life for it. So
Mm.
I always, and I also, sometimes people think they're old. People at every age think they're too old for something. People who are 25 think they're old because they're already 5 years out of college or they don't want to go back to college. I'm old already, or they're 35 or they're 40. You're never too old, and you only get older, and the older you get, the more you think, wow, why did I think I was old at 25? Now it seems ridiculous to me. 25 seems, more like 20 than 50. But, so I think sometimes people handicap themselves by thinking, oh, I'm too old or too much time has passed. And I think, none of us know how many years we have ahead of us or how long we want to continue to work or, how what life holds for us. So I think people should just take advantage of every opportunity that's offered to them and not limit themselves because of age or any other reason or because of skill. I mean, obviously, there might be something where you just like it's impossible. I'm never going to be a golfer, let's say. That's not going to happen, but you know, I was able to learn how to use a microwave oven, and I was able to learn how to develop recipes because I had good cooking skills. So
So yeah, never too old to learn.
you're
And
never to learn. And I say
yeah,
try to be the best you can. I was always tried to be the best that I could at whatever I did. I always wanted, you want to be the smartest person in the room. You want to know the most about, as much as you possibly can, about what you're doing and be as good as you possibly can at what you're doing. And, it brings you great satisfaction in the end and makes you good at what you do. Because
that's great advice. Yeah,
because
sorry.
feel in my career, it was my privilege to be able to give advice about kitchen equipment to readers and to consumers and to friends and even to other journalists will come to me for quotes or for advice because I feel like I was able to carve out something for myself. And again, I've always felt very open about sharing information. So, I've never held back. I'm always, unless something was truly confidential and whoever I was working for didn't want me to share the information, I've always been willing to share information because I feel like we're all in this together and let's help each other out. And again, that was like, brings me back to Cherry Bomb where we started. There was such a wonderful feeling of community. And, it really struck me that when people introduced each other there were introducers at Cherry Bomb, and whoever introduced the speaker, they didn't just get up and say, oh, she went to, Boston University, and then she worked for so and so, and then she worked for so and she wrote 3 books, and please welcome, blah, blah, blah. They really told personal stories about the people and what they meant to them and how they inspired them. And so that by the time the actual speaker came out on the stage, they were practically in tears and they would be, hugging each other on stage. And the warmth and the feeling of love really came through to the audience, that it wasn't just somebody who was given somebody's bio to read. um, and we are a community. That's how I feel. We need to do as much as we can to help each other, not fight each other, and not try to carve out our own little pieces of the world.
That's a great sentiment. I try to practice that.
Oh, it's hard.
Mm.
It's not always easy to follow. I mean, that was another thing Rachel Ray said at the end of her talking about, her philosophy of giving, how she spends so money. She said, sometimes things, take a little shortcut in one. Sometimes you leapfrog over one to the other, but that's life. So, I was willing to give that to her, and she certainly deserves to have some nice things for herself. So, none of us are perfect.
Yeah, just try to be. What is a practice that you do? We'll move on to the sort of habit aspect. So, is there something that you do every day in the kitchen?
Well,
Like a good habit?
I what do I do as a habit? I almost always, almost every time I cook, I use fruits and vegetables, and usually the first thing I do is either pull out my salad spinner or a colander in a bowl to wash things. If I'm washing lettuce that I'm going to want to spin dry, I'll pull out the colander, and before I wash the lettuce, I'll wash all my fruits and vegetables, and that literally that's the first thing I pull out every day. We didn't talk about salad spinners. if people buy whole heads of lettuce, I think a salad spinner is a great tool for drying it. But again, getting back to one of my original points, I think people should make sure they eat lettuce before they buy the salad spinner and not think the salad spinner is going to make them eat lettuce. But, that's certainly one of my habits. And, I have a small battery of tools that I use almost every time I cook, and one is a 12-inch chef's knife. I do rotate because I have so many. If my stuff gets dull, I'll just use another until it gets dull. I use a peeler every day, generally to peel carrots or cucumbers. Um, I have a, I use that every day. I use those things every day, and generally I use a skillet. If I'm making pasta, I use a colander. Um, but it's my practice to clean up as I go along. So very often, even if I have a dinner party, at the end of the party, before I serve the food, everything is pretty tidy in the kitchen. And come into the kitchen and see a huge mess. I like to clean as I go along so that it just makes me feel better. And I'm constantly, again, talking about the cutting board, constantly wiping down the cutting surface in between. So that's very important to me. And as I said before, laying out my tools, I like to know where they are, and I like to take the ones that I know I'm going to use and lay them out.
And you recommend getting prepped beforehand? You recommend that for everyone?
I'm sorry, repeat the question.
So you recommend getting everything ready and cleaning up as you go. You recommend that for everyone?
I recommend that people clean up as they go because it's more orderly. You can find things as you're working. When the meat, let's say you're making a roast, when you take it out to carve it, you have a place to put the carving board, and your knife and your fork are ready. And I'll take out the cutting board. I'll put the knife and the fork on the cutting board so that when the roast comes out, it's ready to be carved, and I don't have to move stuff away and find a space for it. And of course, it's great after you finish the meal to come into a kitchen. There's always going to be some cleanup, but it's great to not come into a total mess. And especially if you have company, people, I tend to not want my guests to help with the cleanup, but when people come into the kitchen, if it's just a total mess, it's like, oh my God, they're seeing this mess, and it's a lot more work for them. So I, and it's just, once if you don't have company, it's like after you finish dinner, you clean up is so much easier, and you can that much quicker till you're on the couch and watching Netflix instead of cleaning up. So I try to clean up as much as I possibly can ahead of time.
That's great advice. Um, my partner does it. I need to do it a bit more.
Yeah. I do have to say that during pandemic, my husband's become much more of a helpmate in the kitchen, and he's taken over, for example, the boiling of the pasta. So he's become the expert at that, and he'll grate the Parmesan cheese, um, and he'll help with the cleanup. I'm not always, I don't feel like he uses hot enough water. I think that's a male female thing that women like hotter water. So I always feel like if he cleans up, the water's not hot enough. But
Yeah, I always have the water as hot as I can stand. Um, and I don't think it's clean until it's been in really, really hot water. My partner's not like that at all.
yeah, I think it's a male female thing
Mhm.
that women like hotter water. And yeah, I always feel like, on the one hand, I think, what am I looking a gift to us in the mouth? He likes to clean up the dishes, let him do it. But I'll come in and I'll feel them, and I know the dishes aren't hot. They're just not that hot. He couldn't have used hot water no matter what he says. But, definitely before the pandemic, that didn't happen at all. So there were some good things, I guess, about the pandemic in spite of it.
I think that people in good relationships got a stronger bond. I think through the pandemic, at least in my experience.
Yeah, I don't know anyone that didn't last. Personally, I don't know anyone who didn't last through it, but yeah, I have one friend who complained that her husband is around a little too much. But they're still together. But I would say that was a good thing for us. Try to be positive about even the pandemic.
Mm. So next we're going to move on to questions from the audience. So I've actually answered quite a few of these already. What are some ways to make use of unused kitchen appliances? For example, I bought my dad a waffle maker for his birthday one year, and he's used it precisely once.
Well, point point made. You know, there are other things you could do with a waffle maker. So a waffle maker makes fantastic grilled cheese sandwiches because there's just so many more little crispy nuggets. It really could double as a panini maker, but it is somewhat limited in terms of what it could do. So other than give it to someone else or sell it, I really don't know what else you could do with appliances that you don't use. Find somebody who will
Um,
take advantage of them. But a waffle maker is a good example. It's a single purpose appliance.
mm, I definitely learnt my lesson after that one. I mean, I was like 16, so,
Well, I will. My daughter has I have a waffle maker in the closet. I probably used it 3 times, other than when I was testing waffle makers. But my daughter uses it almost every day. She keeps the batter in the refrigerator, and she makes it for the kids before school every single day. So, it's just one of those things. For her, obviously it's a necessity. Several times she's called me in a panic. It broke. Which one should I buy? I need a new one because she can't live without it. But, for other people, it's like, and that's why, you can buy waffle makers for $200 or $300. Don't buy a $300 waffle maker unless you know you're going to be making waffles every day.
Mm. Um, so what's a common mistake for using nonstick cookware?
I'd say the biggest mistake is using nonstick cooking spray. So that's a big no-no. First of all, it doesn't need the spray. And second of all, the spray itself will bake onto the finish. And when nonstick cookware gets tacky and hard to clean, it's usually because the spray has baked onto it. And so that's a really big no-no. I mean, other than that, I mean, most people know not to cut in it, or should know by now not to cut in it. Even nonstick cookware that's metal safe, it's not going to scratch from using the metal, but it could degrade to some extent. The other thing about nonstick is it shouldn't be used over very high heat. Um, it's for the most part perfectly safe to use, but if you use it over very high heat, it could release fumes. So it's not recommended. You can go ahead and put it in the dishwasher. Sometimes manufacturers will say not to, but it really can go in the dishwasher. I think sometimes manufacturers themselves perpetuate myths. Like sometimes you'll see a nonstick cookware manufacturer that'll say, waffle makers are a good example. Sometimes waffle makers will say spray the nonstick surface with spray, and it's because they don't know enough about the nonstick surfaces to know they shouldn't be telling people to do that.
Are there any precautions, that you warn people about with equipment that maybe people don't know?
Well, okay, we talked about the nonstick. I think when it comes to food safety, people have to be. I really encourage people to use a meat thermometer and cook food to safe internal temperatures. I think that's really important. And I think when you have a meat thermometer, you not only cook to safe temperatures, you also cook to ideal temperatures so you don't overcook food. But I think that that's very important. Um, I think, again, when it comes to safety, if there's anything wrong with the cord at all, if the cord looks frayed or it looks worn, stop using that appliance. That's a danger sign. Um, People should also, appliances get hot. People need to be careful about them. Make sure you have pot holders nearby. Don't allow children to use appliances unsupervised. Um, I think general good common sense is important when it comes to appliances, as it is with almost everything.
Thank you. I think that's all the questions. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to meet you and to talk to you. And I'm always available. If you have questions, just shoot them my way.
Great. I'll certainly do that. And thank you for giving up your time and coming on the podcast. It was really great to speak to you.
The same here, and wishing you and the audience a happy Easter holiday or whatever holiday they're celebrating at this time of year. Happy spring, happy fall to you guys, right?
Yes. Yes. And enjoy summer. Enjoy spring for you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye. You've been listening to On the House, produced by the Household Management Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes like this from across 10 life management perspectives can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, and any other podcasting apps available on your smart devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating, sharing, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people to find it so we can grow and continue to bring you quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website, hm.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Gabriella Yastra. Thanks for tuning in.